So this presentation will be recorded for future viewing. So if you want to catch up on anything, you can always, I'll send the links out and I'll post it online. You can watch this later. Lillian also gave me permission to be able to share the PDF version of the PowerPoint. So that will be on my website and on social media as well. And any questions that we might not get to that she'll answer later, I'll try to share those after the fact. So without further ado, I am going to introduce Ms. Lillian Hogan of NCX and let her kind of explain her background, her and her company. So Ms. Lillian.
Thanks so much, Danielle. Good morning, everybody. As Danielle mentioned, my name is Lillian Hogan. I am a customer success manager with NCX. We have grown tremendously over the last year, so I'm a relatively new member of the team, but I have been part of NCX for at least our previous 21C cycle, and I'm thrilled to be here to share more about our program and how it's advantageous to landowners. I am going to go ahead and get started sharing my screen. Can everybody see that okay? Great, thank you. So as I mentioned, I am a customer success manager with NCX. I'm here to talk about who we are as an organization, our natural capital exchange program, and how it's advantageous to landowners. I want to thank Danielle for inviting us to share more information about our program and to help answer any questions that you have. As I go through the presentation, feel free to use the chat feature to pose questions. The presentation itself should take between 25 and 30 minutes, so we will have plenty of time at the end to answer any Q&A. So without further ado, here is the agenda for today's meeting. We'll start by covering how we started and how we've grown to be NCX. We'll then jump into the details of our program, what sets us apart from other voluntary carbon credit programs, followed by an overview of our enrollment process. I'll then spend a few minutes answering some frequently asked questions, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. Here's an image of the NCX team. As I mentioned, we have grown quite significantly over the last few weeks even, and most recently added another customer success manager to the landowner success team. Our newest team member is Catherine Morse, and if you reach out to us via email, you may interact with her. We are a dedicated team of passionate individuals and experts who appreciate the value of forests and other ecosystems and want to be part of building a program that provides an alternative solution to landowners who own and manage forests. Our company was co-founded in 2010 by Zach Parissa and Max Nova, our CEO and COO, who attended Yale together. There were a few initial product launches of similar design and scope of what we now call BaseMap. We are the first company to use remote sensing and AI to map out every acre of every forest across the continental US. Our BaseMap technology is updated annually. However, our data sciences team is diligently working on updating that tool more frequently as we expand our program. This technology was most recently updated May 15th of this year, so it's still pretty relevant. Our natural capital exchange program, which is where the acronym of NCX originates, uses BaseMap as part of our assessments. As you may have seen in the past, there are a lot of issues with current forest carbon programs. The majority of these programs aren't working well because the measurements aren't great. Currently, no other program has the level of data that we do to measure additional carbon. Additionally, we frequently see high transaction costs and long contract terms, often between 40 and 100 years with other programs. And as a result, carbon markets just don't work for the majority of privately owned US forests. Our program was designed to achieve that by mapping every acre for every value every year. Landowners were at the forefront of that conversation. Our long-term goals as a company is to pay landowners for all of the natural capital on their land. But like any company, you've got to start somewhere, and we're starting with forest carbon. We conducted our pilot program back in 2019 in Pennsylvania. We then expanded to the Southeast states for our 21B launch, and our 21C program was available to landowners in 16 states that included some of the Northeast and Lake states. We've since expanded our program further, and our 21D cycle, which is currently open for enrollment, is available to all landowners across the continental US. Our current technology and data sets allow us to assess a landowner's business as usual model based on two primary factors: standing inventory and harvest risk. We are incentivizing landowners to defer timber harvest for 1 year, and that equates to a change in the landowner's business as usual or BAU model. That 1 year deferral creates more carbon on the landscape. So how does it work? As I mentioned, we measure the business as usual scenario and the volume of carbon eligible for earning credits for each landowner who enrolls in our program. Landowners then bid on the price at which they'd be willing to defer some or all harvest for 1 year. We then overlay the prices received from landowners via their bid submissions with the prices that corporations are willing to pay. That determines what the market clearing price is for each cycle. The landowners who have submitted bids are notified following the results of our auction, and for those whose bids are accepted, that's when they enter a binding agreement with NCX to reduce their harvest by the agreed amount of credits for 1 year. We will then verify the reduction at the end of the performance period 1 year later, issuing credits to buyers and payments to landowners for the actual amount of additional carbon delivered. I will share more information regarding previous cycle performance on the next slide. So this slide provides an overview of participation from both our 21B and 21C cycles with some recent data regarding 21D enrollment. As you can see, there has been a tremendous increase in both engagement and participation, and we are thrilled to interact with even more landowners as our program expands. To share a few other statistics that are not included on this slide, landowners as small as 20 acres have been assessed as eligible, meaning they have enough eligible carbon volume on their property to participate. Additionally, 45% of assessed properties in 21C were under 500 acres. And lastly, the smallest eligible participant who submitted a bid in 21C was 25 acres. So this program really is designed for family forest owners. We are ecstatic to see the impact that we are able to achieve through this deliberate design of NCX. Displayed on this slide are the 3 key characteristics of our program that set us apart from other voluntary carbon credit programs. Those include annual contract terms. There are no enrollment or participation fees for landowners, and there's no minimum acreage requirements. This gives us the opportunity to interact with landowners who may have previously been excluded from carbon credit programs. We want to continue to hear from landowners to ensure our program has the biggest impact on the largest audience. And with family forest owners making up 39% of the total forest land in the US, more than any other ownership group, your feedback and engagement is one of our key program objectives, so we want to hear from you. We will now jump into the enrollment process. Personally, I usually break it down into 3 primary groupings or categories: enrollment, assessment, and bids. But the first step, which is the enrollment piece, usually takes between 5 and 10 minutes. On this slide, you'll see an overview, but I'll go into a bit more detail and share a short video that covers one way you can provide property information in the coming slides. So to begin, you'll start by creating an account on our website, displayed here, landowners.ncx.com. That link will take you to our landowner page where you can create an account. Once you've created an account, you'll provide some general contact information to include name, phone number, and a good working email. You'll then provide property information. This would include either a full street address or just the county and state if your property doesn't have a street address associated with it, depending on your unique setup. I do want to note that one of our program requirements is that landowners must enroll all of the property under their ownership. This helps maintain the integrity of our program as a whole while also minimizing any potential leakage. Additionally, as part of the enrollment process, you'll have an opportunity to add a legal entity name, if applicable, as well as providing contact information for your consulting forester if you work with one. We do highly encourage landowners to work with registered consulting foresters for best timber management practices. Once you provide that information, you will be taken to our mapping tool where you have 3 options to identify your property. This is a quick video that shows one way you can use our mapping tool to identify the parcels under your ownership. To provide some context before I hit play, you'll see here that we've entered Boone, Michigan, USA into the search box at the top. Again, you can enter a street address if applicable to hone in on the exact parcel, but county or city and state information will take you to the right general area. In this example, we're going to show how you use the Select Parcels feature, but you can also use Draw Shapes button just below. It has the same functionality as Draw Shapes, but allows you to outline the perimeter of a property if for some reason the parcel data that we reference are not 100% accurate. The third option in which you can identify your property boundaries is to upload shapefiles. You'll see here this green upload here hyperlink. You can click that and drag and drop the corresponding files in the pop-up that is displayed. But going that route will bypass this mapping tool entirely. So if you have a lot of land, sometimes the upload shapefiles feature is a little bit easier than mapping the property directly. I'm gonna just slow this down so I can talk over it. Once you've identified the general area where your property resides, you'll click the Select Parcels button on the left side of the web page. Doing so will overlay public county data on our mapping tool to help you identify your specific parcel or parcels. Once identified, you'll click that Add Property button. You'll see that the submission has been accepted when it changes from yellow to blue in color. Once you click Save Changes and confirm you've identified all of your property, you'll be taken to the last page of our enrollment process. There are 3 checkboxes that you'll need to click into, certifying your agreement with each statement. Once you've completed those steps and click that Request Eligibility Assessment button, that will be the formal handoff to us at NCX, where we'll use the information you've provided, our technology and data sets to conduct our assessment. You'll be notified once our assessment is complete and your eligibility report is available. These are distributed weekly on Thursdays for participants who enrolled the week prior. This is a video a landowner named Keith McDaniel helped us put together. He resides in Mississippi and participated in our 21B cycle. In this short video, he explains how he evaluated NCX and our program, the economics of participating, and concluded that for him, it was a mutually beneficial relationship for both the environment and income from future harvests.
Well, going back to the economic side of it, one of the things that we looked at was the weighing the harvest, what return you would get on the harvest versus leaving this timber standing and generating income from that. And it also allows, the decision that we also made is that with the income addition, that it will allow the timber not to be cut, which in turn allows it to grow longer. And each year the timber puts on volume. It does two things: it'll absorb more carbon, and it'll also grow in timber value. So it's a win-win, going back to yearly income and more valuable timber in the long run, because we are able to delay the harvest of the timber, therefore keep it growing. And we can benefit from the hunting. We lease it to the hunters. They can enjoy the hunting of the timber also, but that's what was the deciding factor in getting into the carbon program and the in-capture program.
So sometimes it's always better to hear from landowners directly rather than just somebody from NCX. So we wanted to include this video here so that you can listen to why Keith specifically chose to participate in our program. On the next slide, we'll cover some important dates for our 21D cycle, which, as I mentioned earlier, is currently open for enrollment. As I mentioned, enrollment is now open through early September for any landowner who's interested in participating. We distribute eligibility reports every Thursday for those who enrolled the week prior. Your eligibility report will be available on your NCX dashboard, which is made available to you once you create an account. Your seller agreement, if you choose to submit a bid, will also be available on the homepage of your dashboard. We are currently working through some final updates to the seller agreement itself, but those will be available for all landowners who've enrolled in early August, so just another week or so. The contract term for 21D cycle will begin October 1st of 2021 and end September 30th of 2022. So again, just an annual contract term. Once the performance period has concluded, NCX, we will conduct our follow-up assessment to evaluate the delivery of the harvest deferral credits that were committed. Once we verify that, then payments are issued accordingly. So now that we've discussed who we are, our program, and the overall enrollment process, I would like to spend just a few minutes answering some frequently asked questions before opening it up to Q&A. So one of the most frequently asked questions we get is, how much will a landowner be paid per acre? This is difficult to know without a landowner submitting their property information because many factors influence financial potential, to include rotation age, species mix, and historical harvest activity, as well as local timber economics and any other commitments, such as participation in conservation easements. One thing I would like to note here as well is that enrollment is completely risk-free. So there's no harm in signing up to receive an assessment from us, and you can use that information to determine whether you'd like to move forward with submitting a bid and at what price. Another question we get is, if a landowner needs to enroll all of the property under their ownership, does that mean they're required to defer harvest on all of their acres? The short answer is no. Landowners are not required to bid their maximum volume of eligible carbon. Landowners have the option of submitting volumes that work for them. For example, a scheduled thinning or timber sale can continue as planned. However, we ask for landowners to reduce their bid volume accordingly at the beginning. With regard to removal specifically, the formula we've been sharing for guidance is that one harvest deferral credit is equivalent to 25 green tons of pine or 19 green tons of hardwoods. So if you know the volume that's going to come off of the property through this thinning or timber sale, you can use that formula to calculate how many harvest deferral credits you should reduce your bid by via your seller agreement. How much should a landowner charge for their deferral credits? By completing a bid in the seller agreement, landowners choose the price at which they're willing to supply carbon to the market. Landowners also have the option of submitting multiple volume and price pairings when completing their seller agreement. However, only one pairing will be accepted. We also have published an article on our website under the blog section that provides a formula on how you can calculate an appropriate bid price based on estimated stumpage revenue. If you'd like to view that publication, you can either reach out to us directly, or again, it's displayed on our website under the blog section. I will have contact information for the landowner success team displayed on the last slide of this presentation. So if you want to view that article, we'd be happy to share it with you. Ultimately, though, landowners get to choose the price at which they're willing to defer harvest, therefore making sure our program is advantageous to them based on their primary motivations. So who are the buyers? We've seen strong demand from Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 companies that have big sustainability targets. Microsoft was a major buyer for our 21B cycle. Cargill recently signed a contract with us, and we're working with other firms finalizing contracts now for 21D cycle. Certification is an important next step, and it's particularly important to the buyers who are interested in purchasing these credits. We are working with Verra Carbon Standard. They are a third-party standards institute, and they have already verified our concept note, but we're working with them on full certification. Another question that we get, and I'm not sure if we have consulting foresters on this call, but how should consulting foresters engage with our program? Most of the foresters we've worked with have been handling NCX in ways similar to how they would handle a timber sale, meaning the forester works with their client to come to an agreeable revenue sharing arrangement for the services provided by the forester. If there are any consulting foresters on the call who are interested in getting more information on how to engage with us, please reach out to us directly, and we have some documents that I can share as well. Another question that we get asked is how are natural disasters handled? If a natural disturbance occurs during the 1-year performance period, and this results in a landowner not meeting their deferral commitments, no payments would be made for the associated harvest deferral credits. Landowners will not be penalized further and will not be barred from future participation in NCX cycles. And lastly, can you re-enroll every year? Yes, absolutely. Payments will be issued, as I mentioned, following our second assessment at the end of the contract period. We expect those to be distributed between 30 and 60 days after the cycle has ended. However, if you're interested in enrolling in subsequent cycles, we'd be thrilled to have you participate again. That takes us to the end of the Q&A portion. I would like to open it up to Q&A from the group. But before doing so, I want to take a moment to thank everyone for joining us this morning. I really appreciate you all taking the time out of your busy schedules to learn more about NCX and our program. As I mentioned, if you have specific questions about your property or want to contact us directly for more information, please reach out to landowners@ncx.com. That does go into a shared mailbox that myself and some of the other customer success managers on our team manage, so we will get back to you as soon as possible.
Thanks so much, Lillian. So now we're going to open it up to the floor. So if y'all have any questions, feel free to either unmute yourself and you can ask, or just type it in the chat. And I see one already in the chat. She asks, how does NCX get paid since there's no cost to the landowner?
That's a great question. So we actually take a small fee from the buyer side. where the corporations or from the corporations who are interested in purchasing credits. It's really kind of like a finder's fee. And that's how we get paid.
Next question in the chat box. Do hardwoods or pines sequester the most carbon?
That's a good question. I would say that hardwoods sequester the most carbon, but it's really going to depend on the age of the trees, you know, the overall health of them. It's a little hard to say definitively.
All right, so while we wait to see if anyone else has some questions, I have a whole list of questions. And this is me kind of giving y'all a heads up. I did send these to Lillian ahead of time, and my toddlers are now back here. So one of my questions is, if your bid is accepted the first year and you decide you want to re-enroll, are your chances to being accepted the second year or following years higher because you were originally accepted that first time? Or is it kind of like an even playing field again? It just depends on whoever is applying that year.
It's more the latter, because what influences whether or not you're accepted is the price at which you bid your harvest deferral credits. So if you bid at $15 one year and the market clearing price is $15 and therefore your bid is accepted, but the next year you bid at $17 and the market clearing price is $15, then your bid wouldn't be accepted because you came in higher than what the demand was willing to pay. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so every year you have a chance to change your bid amount, and depending on whatever the market is for that particular year from the buyer side will depend on who's accepted, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. All right, so we got some chat questions. I'm scrolling back up, y'all. One question is, can I see what bids were accepted in prior years to help me determine my bid?
Sure, I can share that information. So for our 21B cycle, we've done 2 commercial cycles so far. 21B cycle, which was earlier this year, and then our 21C cycle, the performance period for that actually started at the beginning of this month. The market clearing price for 21B was $17 for credit, per harvest deferral credit. And then the market clearing price for 21C was $12 per credit. We did anticipate a little bit of a shift downwards just due to the expansion of our program and an increase in supply of credits relative to demand, but have recently added some more people to our sales team, and we expect this number to stay within the $8 to $14 per harvest deferral credit range for a 21D cycle.
So hopefully that answered your question. And referencing what you said before, approximately 1 credit is 19 green tons of pine in volume, correct? And I don't remember what you said for green tons of hardwood.
So it's, this one is specific to how to factor in thinning or harvest activity. But it's 1 harvest deferral credit is equivalent to 25 green tons of pine or 19 green tons of hardwood.
Okay, 25 pine, and that's just, approximately.
Right.
1 harvest deferral credit. Okay. Okay, let me scroll down the chat so we can hear from our folks directly. One track I have is an undivided interest, heirs property. Would this pose a problem, as all property must be enrolled? So if kind of broadening that out, if someone has multiple tracts and maybe one of their tracts is heirs property, how does that work for enrollment if all ownership properties have to be enrolled?
Sure, yeah, that's a great question, and it is one that we get somewhat frequently. So if there are different ownership structures at play, we do require those properties to be enrolled, but that individual landowner would have to create a separate account for that property.
So they would create 2 accounts, one for everything they have complete ownership for, and then
Correct.
a second account for the heirs properties.
Yes.
Okay.
Hello, my
next-
name's William Ham. I'm with my wife, Kadeen Ham. Can you hear us?
Go ahead. Yep,
Yes.
go ahead.
We're a timber forester farmer in South Georgia. And I have several questions about the program.
Okay.
First question is, if we enroll in the program, must we defer all other activities in our timber stand, such as harvesting pine straw, controlled burns, other activities to manage the forest?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the answer to that is no, you don't have to cease those other management activities, both prescribed burns and pine straw. Both of those are permitted practices through our program and wouldn't impact your eligibility.
Okay, thank you. And I want to re-clarify, you don't have to enroll your entire holdings in the program, or you do,
No,
with the deferral?
so you would
Go
need
ahead.
to enroll all of the property under your ownership, but there's not a requirement that you defer harvest across all of those acres.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, next question in the chat box is, did Lillian say that there is a source that will indicate some range of prices at which credits have been purchased? So you did mention that you have a source. Is that something that you can easily find on the website, or is that a PDF that would have to be directly sent to them?
I didn't catch the first half of what you said. Sorry, Danielle, can you repeat it?
You said you talked about the source that indicated the range of prices from the past on which
Mhm.
credits have been purchased. Is that something that you would provide to them directly, or can they find that on the website? And this is also for future reference for other folks.
Right. So we did publish an article that explained why we host an auction and the benefits of doing so, as well as the results of our 21B cycle. That is available on our website.
Okay.
We are anticipating the publication of another article that essentially summarizes our 21C auction. So right now that's not consolidated into one article, but there is one available right now for 21B, and then there should be another one within the next week or so for 21C.
Okay, and that can be found on y'all's blog site.
Yes, correct. If you go to our website, there's a blog like tab at the top, and if you click that, you'll be able to find the document there.
All right, next question. How does imaging software determine carbon credits? Can it really tell the height, age of trees?
Yes, with a certain level of confidence. Our base map technology, and I don't work on the data sciences team, so unfortunately I can't speak to it in great detail. But our base map technology leverages satellite imagery and radar to map every acre of every forest, and through leveraging those tools plus our individual data sets and our own proprietary technology, we can determine the tree species, overall size of trees, and the mix, if there is a mix, on a certain parcel within a landowner's property. If you have more specific, or if you're looking for more specific information, please send us an email and I'll see if I can get some more detailed information from our data sciences team.
Okay, so I have a question real quick.
Sure.
And this is really prevalent to our small landowners that maybe just have a one stand type of tract. They don't have a lot of diversity going on out there. What stage of forest, what age of forest is a landowner eligible? So if they just done a clear cut and they just finished their reforestation process, are they eligible? Do they have to wait till they're closer to that thinning age, or do they have to wait till they have a certain volume of mature timber, marketable, merchantable timber. So when can a landowner actually be eligible to enroll?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the way that our assessment works is we look at both standing inventory and harvest risk, and the results of those two evaluations feed into our predictive algorithm that determines the number of harvest deferral credits a landowner would be eligible to bid. The standing inventory component is based exclusively on merchantable timber. So if the stand was recently replanted and it's very young, you are not going to generate the same number of harvest deferral credits as you would if you were getting close to clear cutting or harvesting those trees.
Okay, so they more or less have to be merchantable trees to have enough volume for y'all's credits to be eligible for
Yes,
simplicity.
most likely.
Okay.
Yeah, and there is that harvest risk component to it. So that may influence the number of harvest deferral credits received. But I know that a big aspect of how many credits a landowner is eligible is based on the merchantable timber on their property.
Okay. So one of the questions in the chat box is there a scenario that neighboring landowners know that a participating landowner defers harvest, thereby they could benefit by accelerating their harvest and ultimately releasing more carbon?
Yeah, that's another great question. And this is something that we have tried to address through our methodology with regard to leakage. One of the ways, so you've got market leakage and then you've got like individual property leakage. What this question is referring to is more broadly the market leakage. And yes, there is a possibility that a neighboring landowner would then harvest more than what they had anticipated. But that component is factored into our methodology and how our harvest deferral credits are determined. We do have a white paper that provides a very detailed overview of our methodology. That's available on our website if you're looking for more detail on how we try and address leakage, both on the landscape and individual property. But yes, that is something that is possible and that is factored into our algorithm used to determine harvest deferral credits.
And I'll have a follow-up question on that in a little bit, but I'm going to finish going through the chat. Would pecan trees be considered forest land for y'all's assessment?
Unfortunately, no. Right now, our program is designed specifically for pine, hardwoods, and softwoods. So fruit-bearing trees like pecan trees would not generate any harvest deferral credits. One, because they're a lot less likely to be harvested to the same degree that pine and hardwood trees are.
All right, next chat question. A landowner with ArcGIS shapefiles available for 12,000 acres and maybe 30 different parcels, could the enrollment data process be streamlined with the shapefiles?
Yes, absolutely. There is a button on our mapping tool for shapefiles specifically for those to be uploaded. So if you have shapefiles and you have 12,000 acres, yeah, we definitely don't want landowners to spend a ton of time trying to identify all of those parcels on our map. So you can drag and drop those shapefiles into our platform, and then it is going to automatically map those properties for you, and then you'll just confirm that those are accurate.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Next question in the chat. If you determine carbon credits in tons of wood, mean you NCX, how is a forestry consultant beneficial to me in this process?
So we feel that consultants are overall a great resource for landowners to utilize as part of just best management practices. it may not necessarily pertain to how you as a landowner engage with us at NCX, but just in general, we do encourage landowners to work with a consulting forester just to get another input, another perspective from an expert on how to best manage the timber on your property.
All right. Of course, I have a whole list of questions. So while y'all think of some more to ask, I'll ask some more. Roughly, what is kind of the percent rate that is accepted from what is enrolled? And I know it's probably going to be based on the buyer side and what the market demand is. But like roughly, what percent has been accepted in the past, and what do y'all kind of anticipate?
So for our 21B cycle, we had over 300 landowners enroll, and then we had about 120 who were accepted. And then for our 21C cycle, we had over 1,500 landowners enroll, and I believe we had about 800 whose bids were accepted. So it's close to 50-50. But it's going to depend largely on the price at which landowners bid their deferral credits at, as well as the price that buyers are willing to pay. So it's hard to say definitively what that's going to look like in future cycles, but that's some data, at least from the previous two.
So a big or a large component, or the majority component that determines if they're accepted, is really based on that bid price that a landowner puts out.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. Sorry about that, y'all. And if you have a question, okay, go ahead.
Okay, so let's say, do you anticipate or foresee a negotiating process at some point in time where people, can lower their price to obtain a sale?
So that is, I would guess, a conversation that's being had, amongst upper management. But right now, the way our program is designed is that if your bid comes in too high and is not accepted for that particular cycle, we notify you of that, and then you are welcome to submit another bid in the following cycle. But right now we don't have the functionality built out to support landowners going back in and revising their bid to a lower dollar amount to ensure their bid is accepted. The thing that we do offer is that they're eligible to participate in a future cycle, and then the property information that they've uploaded to our platform will still be available. So the only thing that you would have to do is request an updated assessment from us, and then you resubmit the bid.
Sounds good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, question in the chat feature. Can landowners ever not collect from deferring harvest? Could you share more about the buyers and how that is structured?
Sure. So it would be helpful to know, I guess, what you mean by not collecting. Is it more so that NCX wouldn't issue payments to you as a landowner? Or is there a different concern that you're wanting me to address? If you can pose that in the chat, that would be helpful, but I can share a little bit more about the delivery of harvest deferral credits and how we look at that to determine how much payment is issued. So what happens is we run an assessment at the start of the enrollment process. We then run an assessment assuming your bid is accepted at the end. That assessment is used, that second assessment is used to determine whether or not you delivered on all of the harvest deferral credits you committed to. If you deliver between 95 and 110%, so you can over deliver, we will pay you the market clearing price for that cycle. If you deliver less than 95% of what was committed, you will be paid a reduced amount per credit. I think it's 2%. And then if you deliver less than 45% or 47.5%, we will not be issuing payments. And the reason that is because the contract that a landowner is signing is with us at NCX. There isn't a direct contract between buyers and landowners, and therefore we are taking on some risk with regard to ensuring we are able to supply credits to the corporations that are interested in buying them. So if you deliver less than 47.5%, NCX is not issuing payments because we then have to source credits elsewhere.
Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, please let me know if that did not answer your question, and I'll try to elaborate on it a little bit more.
All right, next question. She says, I know it depends, however, what age should they consider enrolling growing pines?
I would say that if you have merchantable timber on your property, it certainly wouldn't hurt to fill out or create an account and request an assessment. And then once you receive an eligibility report from us, that will include the number of harvest deferral credits. And then you can look at, again, I mentioned that blog post that provides a formula on how you can structure your bid based on estimated stumpage revenue. I would recommend referring to that to determine what is an advantageous price point for you based on your unique setup, and use that to determine whether or not you actually want to submit a bid. Again, up until you sign a seller agreement, everything is completely risk-free. You're not entering any kind of contractual obligation with NCX. So I would encourage you, if you have merchantable timber on your property, to go ahead and create an account. The enrollment process takes between 5 and 10 minutes, as long as you don't have a significant amount of land. And then just see what the eligibility report entails. And I guess adding on to that, sorry, the assessment that we conduct is going to look at a number of factors. I know I've mentioned it before, but both standing inventory and harvest risk. So it's difficult to provide a specific age, because although the age is going to influence the number of harvest deferral credits, things like proximity to mills and location to major access roads, those are also going to influence the number of harvest deferral credits you would be assessed as eligible to bid. So it really does depend on a number of factors, and that's why, unfortunately, it's just difficult to give concrete numbers with regard to our program. I hope that helps provide some guidance.
It gave me a little question that you may or may not be able to answer. So you talked about it depends too on your markets and your access to highways and roads and everything like that. So can one assume that if you're in a high market for harvesting area, you know, maybe you have 4 mills near you, you would probably have higher harvest deferral credits and therefore more opportunity, I guess, for either more payment or more deferral credits if you're in like a very intense forest harvesting market? Or is that a wrong assessment or assumption?
No, I would say that that assumption is pretty accurate because, yeah, we look at the risk of harvesting occurring on that property as part of our business as usual evaluation. So if you are really close to a lot of mills or even just major access roads that allow you to more easily harvest timber on your property, that would result in a higher harvest deferral credits than somebody that may be located in a really rural area, you know, hours away from a mill.
Okay, perfect. I know 2 more questions I'm interested in. But continue, please, either just unmute your mic or put them in the chat box, because this webinar is for y'all, so I want to make sure your questions get answered. But I did create an account with y'all, and I kind of was reading through the seller's agreement. And one of the things it talks about is basically you're ineligible if you already have an easement on your property or an easement that limits or restricts harvesting. And so one easement that comes to mind is like WRPs, the Wetland Reserve Programs. So if someone has a WRP easement on a portion of their property, does that make them completely ineligible? Or would that just be, you would have to kind of reduce the amount of harvest deferrals as you keep on talking about and volume that you would be putting out for a bid, but you're still eligible? Can you explain that a little bit more if you do have an easement on your land?
Yeah, absolutely. So it really depends on the type of easement and whether it impacts your entire property or, like you mentioned, Danielle, just a portion. If you are enrolled in an easement program that is already restricting harvest activity on that property, those acres would not be eligible for our program because our program is achieving that same objective. That being said, it gets a little complicated because we do require landowners to enroll all of their property. So if you are enrolled in an easement program, what I would recommend is reaching out to us via email, because what we have been doing is asking landowners to enroll the property that is not under the easement, or not under an easement in the enrollment process. And then we document on our end that you are part of an easement program. So if you are selected to provide proof of ownership documentation, we already know why those acres enrolled may not match the documentation you would provide. So you are eligible to participate if you are if you are enrolled in an easement program. It really depends on if harvest activity is already being restricted and if it impacts your property as a whole or just a certain subsection of your land. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, so y'all are willing to work with someone that might have an easement, say like on 500 acres, but then they have 1,500 acres that isn't underneath that easement. Now, if it's underneath the same Q Public shapefile, would you recommend for them pretty much just to like have a different shapefile uploaded that they could upload that would exclude those areas? Or do y'all kind of work with the landowner if it's just underneath the same tract parcel?
So it would be ideal if they could upload a shapefile that excludes the portion that's under an easement, but knowing that shapefiles aren't something that every landowner has readily available, we would be happy to help. There is a part of our assessment that does check against some data that we have to see whether or not those acres are under an easement, but it's not a completely exhaustive data set. So we do very much rely on landowners to share that information with us so we can make sure our assessment is done only on the acres that are not part of the easement.
And how do you know if a landowner is lying about all of their ownership? Like,
Yeah, so there are some clauses in the seller agreement. There are sections within the enrollment process where the landowner is verifying that the property enrolled is representative of their land holdings. But that's not a legally binding agreement, whereas the seller agreement is. And we do proof of ownership checks on a certain portion of landowners whose bids are accepted as part of an audit process on our end to try and make sure that we are verifying that the property being enrolled by individuals is actually their property.
and this is just a minute thing, if someone had a home site that was right next to their 35 acres, but there were two parcels, would they enroll the home site with their 25 acres? So it'd be like 27 acres, or just the timberland part itself, just the 25-acre parcel?
So if the home has timber on it, I would recommend enrolling both of those parcels or selecting both of those parcels. If there is no standing timber and it's entirely like a residential area, then you can just enroll the timber component.
All right, one second.
This is William Ham. I have a couple more questions.
Go ahead.
One, do you have a sample contract available on your website that could be reviewed?
Yes, we do. It's available through the enrollment process there. It's actually one of the check boxes that you click into before requesting an eligibility assessment. It's hyperlinked there. I can also send you the document via email if you'd prefer. Just please reach out to me or put your contact information in the chat feature and I will send you that document directly. But it is an example seller agreement is available to landowners on our platform.
Second question, how do you adjudicate potential disputes between the landowner and you all on end of contract period on the deferrals? How much was deferred or how much may have been harvested?
That's a
If
good
there's a
question.
disagreement,
Go ahead.
that's a potential disagreement. How would you adjudicate that?
I would have to get back to you on that. I'm not 100% sure how that would be handled following the results of our second assessment.
Well, your second assessment would also consider growth, right?
Yes, it
Between
would.
the initial assessment?
But the way our program is designed is we are incentivizing landowners to defer timber harvest. We are not evaluating the biological growth of trees year over year.
So you're
Okay, thank you.
essentially assessing that they did not harvest what they said they would not harvest, correct?
Correct.
All right, there's a question in the chat feature. So we have time for maybe 2 more questions and then we got to wrap up since we're at the noon o'clock already. Can owners of tree farms, i.e. Christmas trees, landscape trees, be eligible to participate in NCX since they are growing trees as well?
Yes, yeah, they would definitely be eligible to participate in our program.
Even though it's a business that they are growing trees?
Yes. Yeah, I guess the biggest aspect of that business would be to be able to account for any likely volume reduction during that performance period and be able to reduce your bid accordingly to make sure that you're able to deliver on all of the credits that you submitted.
All right, next question in the chat box, and I believe the answer is yes, but when would the landowner get paid? It's at the end of the 12-month period after your second assessment, correct?
Yes, yeah, that's correct.
All right, any other questions from the audience? I do have one question, which I referred to you before we jumped in on this webinar. But it's a lot of the talk about wood products of storing the carbon credit, even though they're harvested. So after trees are harvested, carbon is stored in those wood products pretty much forever until they're burned or become something else. And then trees that are young absorbing more carbon as they're growing while they're younger versus older trees. And I've read some of the articles, the difference between sequestering carbon and storing carbon. But do y'all have an article that kind of references why y'all are pushing to defer harvest if wood continues to store that carbon in the wood products like lumber and building materials and such?
So there are a few ways to answer this one. One is right now our program is designed to account for harvest deferrals, but there are other avenues in which we're hoping to expand into in the future, such as reforestation and afforestation, as well as like water conservation and fire mitigation. Those are all things that we want to grow our program to be able to pay landowners for contributing. But as far as growth is concerned, what we are doing is trying to defer harvest during the time in which trees experience the most growth. And during that time period, that is when we are able to store the most carbon or sequester the most carbon out of the atmosphere. There is a graph, Danielle, you may have seen it in the seller FAQ document that shows the natural growth of trees and the specific period in which we're trying to ask the landowners to defer harvest during. And that those inputs are identified through our assessment, because we can look at trees, the species, the size, and things like that to try and make sure that if you have a lot of merchantable timber on your property, you then are eligible for more credits and therefore more potential value from the contract than if you have pre-merchantable timber.
Okay, that helps. I know that's just been a lot of talk with a lot of folks that I've discussed. So, and Bucky asked, do y'all do this webinar or this type of webinar every week, every month? Do you do it as requested? So I know this particular webinar was hosted by Landon Ladies. I asked NCX to kind of talk about these new carbon markets, their new program, but how often do y'all put on this type of informational webinar or future webinars?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there are different team members who have agreed to host different webinars. So we have a few team members that work specifically with landowner associations. My colleague Alex McIntosh and I work very closely with consulting foresters. So we definitely engage in webinars kind of across various forestry organizations. I do not know offhand when our next scheduled webinar is, but Bucky, if you want to send us an email if you're interested in listening to a future webinar, I'd be happy to share that schedule with you. I just don't know it offhand.
Sure, I have a client that I would really like to see a similar type presentation, so I'll get in touch with you guys.
Okay, great, thank you.
And this particular webinar will be posted online too. So if you have anyone else that you would like to share this information with, when it is uploaded, y'all are welcome to share these links and this information. All right, so we're just going to answer this one last question that's in the chat feature. And then if you have any other questions that we didn't get to, or maybe you thought about it after the fact, you can email Lillian directly with that email, landowners@ncx.com, or you can also email me at landonladies@gmail.com, and I can put a list together to send out to them and do some follow-ups with y'all. But the question in the chat is, just to clarify, payment is made based on the increase in volume of carbon credit tons of trees at the beginning and the end of the year?
So payments are issued based on whether or not the landowner delivers on the harvest deferrals that they committed to. So again, we're not counting for or accounting for the biological growth of the trees, but rather under your business as usual scenario, did you defer timber harvest as outlined in the seller agreement that you submitted? So we're just looking at how many trees did you have on your property at the beginning? What was the likelihood of harvest activity occurring? How many credits of those total eligible did you bid? And did you deliver on actually deferring those harvests at the end of the performance period?
All right, well, thank you again so much, Lillian, for giving this webinar, for giving us this information. It really cleared up a lot of questions like, how is this going to work? How does this work for the landowner? So I'm able to explain that a lot more. Hopefully a lot of y'all found this very beneficial as well. And of course, again, if you have any follow-up questions or you think of something later on in the week, don't hesitate to reach out to Lillian or myself, and we'll try to get those questions answered for you. But thank y'all so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you, Danielle, for the opportunity. Really enjoyed getting to share more about our program, getting to speak with you a little bit beforehand, and getting to engage with all of you who joined us today. So thank you very much.
All right, thank y'all. I hope y'all have a great Wednesday.
Take care.
Bye.